Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into the deepest mysteries still remaining on our own planet, the ocean. But not just the waves we see or the tides we know. Tonight, we drift far below the surface, into a place where light can't reach, where time feels slower, and where most of Earth's story remains untold. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the ocean together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Let's begin not with the ocean as a map, or a science problem, or a puzzle to solve, but as a presence, as something ancient and breathing. When you stand on the shore and watch the water reach toward your feet, it's easy to think of the ocean as something outside you, something over there. But it's also in you. Every cell in your body is descended from ancestors that came from the sea. The salt in your tears, the rhythm of your heartbeat, even the oxygen in your lungs, those are all stories that began in water. The ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface. From space, the planet looks blue, veiled in shifting currents and clouds. But that surface hides something else, something deeper and harder to name. The average depth of the ocean is over 3.5 kilometres, and some trenches plunge down more than 11 kilometres. That's deeper than Mount Everest is tall. But it's not just the depth, it's the volume, the mass, the crushing quiet immensity. The ocean isn't just a surface, it's a space. A vast three-dimensional space filled with valleys and ridges, volcanoes and plains, life and silence. And yet, despite its enormity, we've explored less than 10% of it. Think about that for a moment. If the ocean were a library, we've only walked into the front entrance and peeked at the first shelf. If it were a cathedral, we've barely opened the doors. Most of it remains untouched, unmapped, unseen. Not because we've forgotten about it, but because exploring it is hard, and strange, and sometimes unsettlingly humbling. We've sent spacecraft to Mars, rovers to the moon, probes to the edge of the solar system. We've scanned planets hundreds of millions of kilometres away and photographed the surface of Pluto. But our own ocean floor, just a few kilometres beneath us, remains a mystery. In fact, we have more detailed maps of the moon's surface than we do of the Earth's ocean basins. That's not because the ocean is unimportant, it's because it's difficult. The sea hides what it holds. Light disappears within a few hundred metres, GPS signals vanish, the pressure builds, and what lies beneath doesn't want to be captured all at once. It reveals itself slowly, and only to those willing to listen. Imagine trying to explore a world where you can't see, where you can't breathe, where every movement is resisted by thick, heavy water. Imagine navigating through pitch darkness, without GPS, without roads, without landmarks. And imagine knowing that no matter how deep you go, you've still barely scratched the surface of what's out there. That is the reality of the ocean. But tonight, we're not going to race through facts or try to conquer this mystery. We're going to drift with it. Float above the abyss, gently circle its edges and see what it teaches. Not just about biology and physics, but about patience, about curiosity, about what it means to know something slowly. Because the ocean is not just a physical place. It is a mirror of the unknown, a reminder that not all questions need quick answers. That some stories are written in slow, swirling currents, not in headlines or bullet points. The ocean invites us to pause, to wonder, and to accept that some mysteries are meant to unfold gently in their own time. So as we begin this quiet journey together, try to picture it. A planet not defined by land, but by liquid. A world where life began, where it may still be hiding in forms we've never imagined, and where the deepest truths of Earth are waiting, just beneath the waves. We won't solve everything tonight. We're not here to finish the map. We're here to feel the silence, to listen to the pressure, to let the vastness remind us how much there still is to learn. The ocean isn't behind us in knowledge, it's ahead of us, waiting, not for discovery, but for attention. Let's go there, slowly. To most people, the ocean feels close. You might live near it, swim in it, or see it from the window of a plane. It laps against coastlines, swells under ships, and fills the blue on every globe. And yet, despite this nearness, it remains, paradoxically, distant. A space we think we understand because we see its surface, but that becomes stranger the deeper we try to go. Tonight, let's ask a simple-sounding question. If we've built rovers to explore Mars and probes that send back data from the edge of the solar system, then why is it still so hard to explore the ocean just a few kilometres beneath our feet? To begin, imagine trying to explore your own basement, but your flashlight doesn't work, your GPS has stopped responding, the pressure in the air is slowly increasing to dangerous levels, and your only communication with the outside world is a walkie-talkie that occasionally blurts static. That's the ocean. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets, not just physically, but in how it disrupts all the assumptions we've built into exploration. On land, we rely on a network of satellites and signals. GPS helps us find our way. Wi-Fi and radio allow us to share discoveries instantly, and maps can be redrawn with every drone flyover. In space, although vast and airless, communication still travels by light and radio waves. We can steer rovers, receive photographs, even live stream from Mars, albeit with a small delay. But in the ocean, none of that works. Water is opaque to many of the tools we take for granted. Light fades rapidly. Red light disappears first, then orange, yellow and green, until, by 200 meters deep, only a narrow range of blue light remains. Beyond that, there is nothing but blackness, and sound, though useful for marine animals like whales, travels slowly and bends in odd ways depending on salinity, temperature and depth. Radio waves, which our phones, satellites and spacecraft depend on, can only travel a few centimetres in seawater. So when we send machines into the deep, they're often on their own. We do have workarounds. Submarines and remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, use long cables to tether them to a surface ship. These cables can transmit power, instructions and video footage, but they're bulky, delicate and limited in range. Try steering a robot with a garden hose attached to it in a pool the size of a continent, and you'll get a sense of the challenge. Untethered, we use autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, that navigate independently. But their batteries are limited, and without GPS, they must rely on sonar, gyroscopes and programmed instructions to find their way. The deeper they go, the less reliable everything becomes. There's also the matter of scale. The ocean is not just wide, it is deep and vast in all three dimensions. Exploring it isn't like walking across a field or flying over a mountain range. It's like trying to study the atmosphere by releasing one balloon every decade. Most of the ocean lies far from any coast, in places that take days of sailing just to reach. And once you arrive, you still face a realm where each metre brings a new layer of complexity. Currents shift, temperature drops, life thins out, and pressure builds. Speaking of pressure, let's pause for a moment on that. At sea level, we live under one atmosphere of pressure, the weight of all the air above us. In water, pressure increases by 1 atmosphere every 10 metres. By the time you've reached a depth of 1,000 metres, you're experiencing 100 atmospheres of pressure. Go to 11,000 metres, like in the Mariana Trench, and it's over 1,100 atmospheres. That's the equivalent of placing 50 jumbo jets directly on top of a single square metre of your body. It crushes most things that try to go there, including dreams of easy exploration. Materials that work well in space, like aluminum or composite plastics, can implode under this kind of stress. Even titanium, used in deep-sea submersibles, must be shaped carefully to avoid buckling. Every nut, bolt, seal and wire has to be pressure-proof, corrosion-resistant, and flexible in freezing cold. And when something goes wrong, there are no astronauts or engineers nearby to fix it. The ocean doesn't offer second chances. Then there's the human factor. People get seasick, equipment fails, weather can delay or cancel expeditions for weeks. Unlike spacecraft that run for years with solar power, ocean expeditions depend on ships, crews, food, and fuel. Missions must be meticulously planned, launched in windows of calm weather, and packed with enough scientific instruments to make the trip worthwhile. And when they return, often months later, scientists begin the slow task of decoding the data, sometimes discovering new species, other times finding only more questions. Even when we do gather good data, there's the problem of interpreting it. Sonar scans can hint at shapes and structures, but they're not photographs. They're acoustic shadows, like echoes bouncing off distant walls in a dark room. Mapping an ocean floor takes years of overlapping scans, careful stitching, and often a bit of guesswork. Some seafloor maps still contain outlines drawn decades ago with limited tools, surrounded by vast grey patches labelled simply unknown. All of this isn't meant to frustrate you. On the contrary, it's meant to slow us down, to invite a kind of respect for the unknown that doesn't demand quick resolution. The ocean isn't resisting exploration out of hostility. It simply doesn't lend itself to the methods we've used elsewhere. It asks us to adapt, not just our machines, but our minds. Because looking down isn't easy when the thing you're looking into is older than history, wider than any country, and more complicated than the stars. We often say the ocean is unexplored, as if it's a task we've neglected. But perhaps it's more like a book written in a language we're only beginning to learn. In the next session, we'll talk about the forces of pressure and darkness more closely, the physical barriers that make the ocean less a place to go and more a force to contend with. But for now, as you drift here with me, just remember, the reason the ocean is so hard to look down into is because it isn't just a place. It's another world, and we, strange air-breathing creatures of the surface, are still learning how to visit it. Let's take a deep breath together before we continue. Imagine that with each breath out you're sinking gently, down through the layers of ocean water, past the churning surface, past the dancing sunlight, down into the quiet. Let the light above you fade, the sounds grow still, and the weight of the water settle around your shoulders like a heavy, cool blanket. You're not rushing, you're simply drifting, deeper and deeper, into a place where most of Earth quietly exists but few have ever truly entered. Down here, the world changes. The rules that guide life on the surface slowly come undone. There is no horizon, there is no sky. The boundaries we're used to, up and down, near and far, begin to blur. And as we keep drifting downward, there are three things that begin to press in. The weight of the water above, the cold that seeps into everything, and the darkness that becomes complete. Let's start with the weight. We live our entire lives under the weight of the atmosphere, what we call one atmosphere of pressure. It's invisible, gentle, and easy to forget. But as you go down into the sea, every 10 metres you descend adds another atmosphere. By the time you reach just 100 metres, the pressure has doubled. At 1,000 metres, it's 10 times what you're used to. And in the deepest trench we know, the Mariana Trench, you'd be facing over 1,000 atmospheres. That's the same as placing 50 fully loaded airplanes directly on top of you. Not many things survive under that kind of weight, and yet some do. There are creatures down here with no bones, no air pockets, nothing that can be crushed. Their bodies are soft, jelly-like, adapted not to resist the pressure, but to yield to it. They don't fight the ocean. They move with it. Their enzymes and membranes function at pressures that would destroy almost any surface organism. It's not resilience in the way we think of it. It's more like becoming one with the environment, accepting the pressure as normal, not as a threat. Our machines don't have that luxury. Submarines and probes built for the deep must be shaped carefully, with smooth curves and no sharp edges where stress can build up. Titanium spheres are used to house electronics and people, because a sphere distributes pressure evenly. But even the best engineered devices can fail. One small crack, one miscalculation, and the water doesn't politely wait. It rushes in with force beyond comprehension, snapping metal like twigs and reducing complex systems to drifting debris. And yet, beneath all that weight, something else is happening. The temperature is falling. In most parts of the ocean, once you pass a few hundred meters, the water stabilizes at just a few degrees above freezing. It's not frozen, because salt water resists freezing at these pressures, but it is cold, bone-deep cold, the kind that doesn't sting but simply removes heat slowly, methodically, like a tide pulling warmth away from you molecule by molecule. Most of the deep sea hovers between 0 and 3 degrees Celsius. For machines, this means brittle components and frozen hydraulics. For life, it means slow metabolism, long lifespans, and an eerie kind of stillness. There are creatures here that glow gently in the dark, not to light their way, but to communicate, to attract prey, or to vanish in a burst of counter-illumination. Some are so transparent they barely seem real. Others, like the black dragonfish, are so well adapted to darkness that they've evolved light-absorbing pigments in their skin, rendering them invisible in the abyss. Bioluminescence isn't just decoration, it's a language, a defense, a weapon. In a world without sunlight, light becomes a resource more precious than gold. And then there's the darkness itself. A kind of darkness that isn't just absence of light. It's a physical presence, a weight, a depth, a silence. Above 200 meters, you'll still see some colour. Blue, mostly. By 500 meters, you're in a twilight zone. Shapes grow vague. At 1,000 meters, the midnight zone begins. No light from the sun ever reaches here. It is, in every way, eternal night. But unlike the night we know on land, there's no moon, no stars, just darkness that continues, unbroken for kilometers. And within that darkness, life has flourished. Not in defiance of it, but because of it. This is what's so easy to forget when we talk about unexplored places. We assume that what's hard for us must be hard for everything. But life has a way of unfolding into every crack, every pressure point, every silent fold of the earth. The creatures of the deep don't find it dark or cold or crushing. For them, it's simply home. That's why exploring this part of the ocean isn't just about engineering stronger machines. It's about humility. It's about understanding that the conditions we find unbearable are not universal truths. They're just limitations of our biology. And to truly explore the deep sea, we don't just need better tech. We need to shift our perspective. To accept that there are ways of living, thriving, and sensing that are beyond our usual frame of reference. In the surface world, we seek clarity, visibility, comfort. We build our homes with windows, our cities with streetlights, our devices with screens that glow. But down here, in the depths, none of that applies. The creatures don't need to see in the way we do. They sense pressure changes, vibrations, faint traces of chemicals in the water. They map their world through touch and smell and light that we cannot see. So as we descend further into this story, take a moment to notice what's being left behind. The light, the heat, the sounds of the surface. They're still there, far above us, like a dream beginning to fade. But down here, the dream changes. It becomes slower, denser, and somehow more alive. We're not meant to conquer this place. We're meant to listen to it, not to shine spotlights and demand clarity, but to drift and to wonder and to let the deep remind us that the world is wider, stranger, and far more beautiful than we ever imagined. If you've ever stood in a hallway and whispered to someone at the far end, you'll know how strange sound can be. It doesn't always travel in a straight line. It bounces off walls, gets absorbed by curtains, distorted by distance. Sometimes it carries, sometimes it fades into nothing. Now imagine trying that same experiment underwater, but the hallway is the length of a continent, and the walls keep moving, and the pressure is high enough to bend steel. That's what communication feels like beneath the ocean. Above the surface, we're used to living in a web of signals. You check your phone and satellites answer. Planes find their paths across the globe using GPS. Even deep space probes can call home using radio transmissions that cross billions of kilometers. But once you submerge into the ocean, that elegant web collapses. The familiar technologies, radio waves, Wi-Fi, even light, stop working the moment you get below the surface. It's not because they're weak, but because the ocean has different rules. Water is a stubborn medium. Radio waves, which travel effortlessly through air and vacuum, are absorbed almost instantly by seawater. A signal that could travel across a continent in the sky barely makes it past a few inches underwater. Even at shallow depths, cell signals die quickly, replaced by static and silence. GPS, which depends on timing radio pulses from satellites, doesn't work at all beneath the waves. There is no satellite signal that can reach a submarine. There is no underwater version of Google Maps. Instead, we turn to sound. The ocean is, in some ways, a world built for sound. Whales use it to sing across vast distances. Dolphins click and chirp in complex underwater conversations. Submarines ping sonar pulses into the dark, listening for echoes, like bats navigating in a cave. Sound moves better in water than in air, faster, more clearly, over longer distances. But it also bends and warps, and echoes in ways that make precise location or data transmission a delicate art, not a solved problem. When we send robots into the deep, whether remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, or autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, we face a hard truth. We can't really talk to them the way we talk to machines. On land, ROVs are usually tethered to a ship on the surface by long, reinforced cables that carry power and data. These cables are bulky, often hundreds or thousands of meters long, and must be carefully spooled and managed to avoid tangling or snapping. They turn the robot into a kind of deep-sea marionette, useful but limited in range, and vulnerable to currents or obstacles. AUVs, by contrast, operate untethered. They follow pre-programmed paths, gathering data silently and independently. But once they're underwater, they're on their own. There is no joystick steering them in real time, no real-time video feed. At best, scientists might send a few acoustic pings, short instructions sent as sound pulses that travel slowly and imprecisely. The vehicles must navigate with onboard sensors, internal gyroscopes and sonar, and when they return, hours or days later, we download the data and hope that everything worked as planned. It's a kind of delayed conversation, a game of underwater voicemail. We send our questions down in silence and wait, patiently, to see if anything comes back. This delay and disconnection shape every part of ocean exploration. Unlike satellites in space which stream data back constantly, ocean instruments collect data in bursts. A robot might dive for 12 hours, mapping the terrain, photographing the seafloor, measuring temperature and salinity. But only once it surfaces do we get to listen to what it recorded. Sometimes the news is breathtaking. A new species, a mysterious formation, a strange pattern in the currents. Other times, the message is silence. Batteries failed. A camera froze. The vehicle turned back early. In the deep, even silence is a form of answer. And yet, this slow, uncertain process is part of what makes ocean exploration different from every other form of discovery. It demands patience. It doesn't reward instant feedback. You can't live stream from the bottom of the ocean. You can't check in every few seconds. You must wait. You must trust. And above all, you must accept that much of what you're reaching for might never respond. Some researchers describe this process as a kind of deep listening, not just to sound, but to the world itself. When whales sing across the ocean, their low, haunting notes can travel thousands of kilometres. Some frequencies even get trapped in a layer of water called the soothe channel, a natural duct that carries sound far beyond normal range. It's as if the ocean has its own wires, its own hidden audio system. But tuning into it requires care. Noise from ships, sonar and human activity can overwhelm it. And below certain depths, even sound becomes muffled and strange. This is why some of the most profound tools in oceanography are not cameras or cables, but hydrophones, underwater microphones that simply sit and listen. Some record the crackle of distant icebergs, others capture the click-song conversations of sperm whales in the dark, and some pick up deep rumbles from volcanoes or the ghostly hum of tectonic plates shifting beneath the ocean floor. It's a reminder that even in the silence the ocean is speaking, but it doesn't raise its voice. Our machines, for all their precision, struggle to keep up with this softness. They want clarity, certainty, and speed. But the ocean offers none of those things. It offers depth, delay, and distortion. It offers time, and it asks us to respond not with louder signals, but with better ears. In a world where we're used to constant contact, the deep sea feels lonely. But it's not lonely. It's just slow. It's not silent. It just speaks on a different scale. And to hear it, we have to be quiet too. We have to let the noise fall away. The Wi-Fi, the data feeds, the instant updates. We have to let ourselves drop beneath the hum of modern life into a place where messages travel like echoes and meaning takes time to surface. In the next session, we'll explore how the very shape of the ocean, its ridges, canyons, and shifting floors, makes mapping it a challenge no satellite can easily solve. But for now, rest here for a moment, in the hush, in this slow conversation between us and a world we're still learning how to hear. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that the Earth had never dried, that its surface remained entirely submerged, and that everything we know, cities, mountains, forests, and deserts, existed underwater. If that were the case, how would we make sense of geography? How would we draw maps? How would we find elevation, plot roads, or explore without light or air? The truth is, most of the Earth still is underwater, and we're only beginning to realise just how complex and unreadable that submerged world truly is. The ocean, unlike the land, is not a surface you can simply scan. It is not open to the sky, to satellite eyes, to the logic of top-down cartography. Most maps you've seen of the ocean floor, those sweeping blue reliefs with underwater mountain ranges and deep trenches, are not really photographs. They're approximations. They're stitched together guesses based on satellite measurements of how gravity tugs ever so slightly at the water surface. Because even when we look from orbit, we're still only seeing the effect of the ocean floor, not the floor itself. To put it another way, imagine trying to map the shape of a blanket by watching how a layer of fog settles over it. That's what most of our seafloor maps are based on. Small changes in sea surface height caused by gravity anomalies. A mountain under the ocean will cause water to bulge upward slightly, and a trench will let it dip. Satellites can detect those tiny variations, and clever math helps us infer what might be underneath. But inference isn't certainty. Much of what we know about the seafloor comes from models, not from direct measurement. And the reality, when we do look directly, is much more chaotic. The ocean floor is a rugged, dynamic landscape. There are mountain ranges longer than any on land, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which winds down the spine of the ocean like a seam. There are trenches deeper than Everest is tall, like the Mariana Trench, which drops over 11,000 metres into darkness. There are undersea volcanoes, rift valleys, hydrothermal vents, landslides, and sediment plains. And yet, as vast and complex as all this terrain is, only a fraction of it has been mapped in high detail. As of now, less than a quarter of the global seafloor has been surveyed with high-resolution sonar. That means more than 75% remains in a state of cartographic twilight. Fuzzy, unresolved, or simply unknown. Not because we lack the technology, but because the sheer size of the task is daunting. To map the entire seafloor with modern sonar systems would take decades of ship time, even with a fleet dedicated solely to that purpose. And sonar mapping isn't instant. A research vessel has to pass slowly over the water, sending sound pulses down and waiting for the echoes. Every pass reveals a strip of terrain, maybe a few kilometres wide. To cover the entire ocean would be like trying to mow every lawn on Earth with a single push mower. Then there's the problem of access. Some parts of the ocean are simply too remote. Weeks from any port, subject to wild weather and strong currents, they remain out of reach not because we've forgotten them, but because the journey itself is difficult. Other areas are avoided because of political tensions, protected environments, or fragile ecosystems. And of course, the deeper the ocean, the harder the mapping becomes. Sound scatters. The seafloor softens into fine sediment. Equipment drifts or misreads. And sometimes, we simply don't know what we're looking at. One of the great surprises of ocean exploration is just how often we find unexpected things. Not just unknown species, but unexpected shapes. Mountains where we expected flatness. Craters where none had been marked. Entire ridges, reefs, or shipwrecks that had gone unnoticed for centuries. It's not that they were hiding. It's that we weren't listening the right way. And this is where the metaphor shifts, from exploration to perception. Because the ocean isn't hiding its shape out of secrecy. It simply doesn't conform to our usual ways of knowing. On land, we take for granted the ability to see, to walk, to touch. The world gives up its forms easily. But beneath the waves, form is elusive. Shape is soft. Everything is filtered through layers of distortion, refraction, pressure, noise, and time. To map the ocean, in the truest sense, requires more than machines. It requires a mindset of patience and humility. It means acknowledging that some places can only be known slowly, through echoes and outlines, through fragments and returns. That some discoveries are not made by force, but by drift. Not by spotlight, but by lantern light. Some of the newest efforts in seafloor mapping are turning to collaborative models, where private ships, fishing vessels, and commercial fleets contribute sonar data in small pieces. Over time, these fragments accumulate, and the maps sharpen. But even then, we're only just beginning. For every square kilometre we've charted, dozens remain unknown. For every canyon revealed, others wait beneath miles of still water, their existence whispered only in deep, quiet pulses. There's a kind of beauty in this unfinished map, a sense that our planet still holds secrets, that not everything has been divided, labelled and placed under glass, that even in an age of satellites and simulations, there are places that resist resolution, places that prefer to remain misty at the edges. And perhaps that's the gift of the ocean, not just in what it hides, but in how it reminds us that knowing is not a single act. It's a process, a wandering, a listening. The sea doesn't yield to demands, but it does sometimes respond to patience. In the next session, We'll turn from the invisible landscape of the seafloor to the ships and crews who brave its mystery. Because for every sensor and sonar beam, there is a hand guiding it, a human choice to search, and a limit to how much we can give and how much we're willing to spend when it comes to understanding a world so different from our own. So far, we've followed sound down through water. We've drifted into darkness, felt the weight of pressure settle like a second gravity, and glimpsed the ocean's reluctance to reveal its own shape. But even if we had perfect machines, silent, agile, immune to cold and pressure, even if the sea were briefly still and offered us its entire breadth without resistance, there would still be another barrier. Not in the water, but on land. Not scientific, but societal. It's the limit of how far we're willing to go, how much we're willing to spend, and how often we forget that beneath our feet is another world entirely. You might expect in the 21st century that we would treat the ocean as a scientific priority. After all, it regulates our climate, feeds billions, holds the keys to ancient history, and may contain forms of life we've never seen. And yet, year after year, it receives a fraction of the funding, attention, and cultural curiosity that space does. NASA, the US space agency, has a budget in the tens of billions. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has a small sliver by comparison. And it's not just in the United States. Around the world, oceanography departments struggle to compete with the allure of the stars. Part of this is emotional. The ocean is too familiar. It's around us, under planes, outside windows, pooled into maps we memorized as children. It doesn't sparkle like space. It doesn't offer alien landscapes with twin suns and crimson skies. Instead, it offers silence, wetness, mystery, but not the kind that shows up easily on posters. It's a realm of complexity, not spectacle, and for many that makes it less exciting, more complicated, less tidy. But exploration isn't just about drama, it's about persistence. And ocean exploration, as quiet as it may be, requires an enormous amount of effort, planning, and money. Every deep-sea expedition depends on a surface vessel, a ship that can carry crew, equipment, food, fuel, and a laboratory. These aren't cruise ships. They're often small, utilitarian, and expensive to operate. Just keeping a research vessel at sea can cost tens of thousands of dollars per day. That doesn't include the cost of building the submersibles, maintaining the sensors, or analysing the data afterward. Then there's the question of people. Unlike robotic Mars missions, which once launched can operate for years on their own, ocean missions require constant human oversight. Crews need to eat, sleep, and work in shifts. There must be technicians, engineers, marine biologists, pilots, and cooks. Every role is essential, and every person adds weight, needs space, and must be accounted for. Even short missions demand a small floating village of skills and supplies, and because weather changes quickly at sea, trips are often delayed, cut short, or postponed entirely. Even the machines themselves are not infallible. ROVs and AUVs, despite being built to withstand immense pressures and conditions, are subject to malfunctions. A broken thruster, a misaligned sensor, a software glitch. Any one of these can derail an expedition. Retrieval is not always possible. Some vehicles have been lost forever, swallowed by the very environment they sought to study. Others return but offer incomplete or corrupted data, and unlike in labs or controlled settings, repairs at sea are limited. There is no spare parts warehouse floating nearby, no extra technician who can be flown in. What you have on board is what you work with. And let's not forget human biology. Divers, who brave the ocean directly, face some of the harshest limitations. Even with advanced breathing systems and pressurized suits, there's only so far and so long a human can go. Recreational divers rarely exceed 40 meters. With training and equipment, technical divers can push to 300 meters. But beyond that, the risks grow extreme. Decompression sickness, nitrogen narcosis, and simple cold fatigue all work against you. The deepest dive on record by a human is just over 1,000 metres, still far above most of the ocean floor. For everything deeper, we rely on machines. But perhaps the greatest limit of all is attention. Exploration doesn't just require ships and sensors, it requires interest. It requires people and institutions to care. And too often, the ocean is left out of the narrative. It isn't taught in schools with the same romance as the planets. It isn't framed as a frontier. And so, even as our coastlines change, even as marine species disappear, even as underwater volcanoes rumble with signals of future shifts, we look away, or we look up toward the stars, as if our greatest mysteries lie only beyond the sky. This isn't to say space exploration is unworthy, far from it. But perhaps what's needed is balance, a recognition that the unknown doesn't only exist at the edge of the universe, it also exists beneath the soles of our shoes, that we live not above a planet but upon one, that the ocean, in all its silence and strangeness, is no less mysterious than the far side of the moon. And there's something else, something softer. While space exploration offers the idea of escape, new worlds, distant futures, the ocean offers something more intimate, a return, a descent, not into alien soil but into our own origins. Life began in water. The chemistry of our blood echoes the salinity of ancient seas. Our hearts beat with rhythms shaped by tides. To explore the ocean is not just to go somewhere new, it's to remember something old. So the question is not just why haven't we explored more, but why we haven't chosen to, why we haven't prioritised it, invested in it, dreamed of it. The answers are as much about politics and perception as they are about physics and funding. And until that changes, until we see the ocean not as background but as terrain, we will remain surface dwellers, skimming the top of something far vaster than we allow ourselves to imagine. In the next part of our journey, we'll leave the challenges behind, not because they're resolved, but because they frame what comes next. We'll begin to look at what we have discovered in the slivers of ocean we've explored, and how those discoveries have reshaped what it means to be alive. Down in the black stillness where the sunlight dies, deeper than fish once dared and beyond the reach of coral or kelp, there are cities. Not cities like ours, with walls and windows, but hubs of life, rising from the seafloor like breathing gardens, built around pillars of smoke and flame. They glow faintly in the darkness, not with electricity or torchlight, but with chemistry. And they live, fiercely, abundantly, against everything we once thought possible. Until 1977, the idea of life without sunlight was simply not considered. Every known ecosystem, every forest, every field, every ocean reef, depended in some form on the sun. Plants turned light into sugar. Animals ate the plants. Other animals ate those animals. And the chain continued. Photosynthesis wasn't just a method of survival. It was the foundation, the assumption, the rule. But then, in the late 1970s, a team of scientists exploring the Galapagos Rift in a submersible named Alvin stumbled onto something entirely unexpected. Deep below the waves, near a crack in the Earth's crust, they found life. Not scattered microbes, but full ecosystems. Clusters of strange, tall tube worms anchored in the sediment. Fields of clams, squat lobsters skittering across the rocks, and all of it thriving, without any sunlight at all. The source of their survival? Vents. Specifically, hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor where seawater, having seeped deep into the Earth's crust, is superheated by underlying magma and then blasted back into the ocean. These vents pour out scalding water rich in minerals, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and other compounds that, to us, seem more like toxins than nutrients. But to the organisms down there, it's a feast. Instead of using sunlight to make energy, the base of these ecosystems, bacteria and archaea, use a process called chemosynthesis. They take the chemical energy from vent fluids and convert it into organic matter. These microbes form mats on the rocks and line the insides of vent chimneys. They live in symbiosis with larger creatures, tucked inside the tissues of tube worms, hiding in gill chambers of clams nestled in the bellies of blind shrimp. It's a system that completely rewrote the rules of biology. For the first time, scientists had proof that life could exist. Not just at the surface or in the sun, but deep within the Earth's crust, independent of the sun's energy. The implication was startling. If life could exist here, in such a harsh and alien place, then it could potentially exist anywhere. Under the icy shells of Europa, in the sulfuric lakes of Titan, or even deep underground on Mars. Let's pause with the tube worms a moment. They're some of the most iconic creatures of these vents. Riftia pachyptila, to be precise. Long, red-plumed, and housed in white chitinous tubes that can grow over 2 meters in length. They have no mouths, no digestive systems. Instead, they rely entirely on symbiotic bacteria that live inside a special organ called a trophosome. The bacteria process hydrogen sulfide and provide nutrients in return. It's not just cooperation, it's mutual survival. Other creatures join the banquet. Giant clams with thick shells and shimmering insides, crabs that pick over microbial mats, eel-pout fish with sluggish movements and pale skin, drifting like ghosts. All of them adapted to this unique setting, not just biologically but behaviourally. Many species exist only in the narrow zone where the vent's heat meets the freezing ocean water. Too close, and it's boiling. Too far, and it's lethally cold. It's like living on the edge of a flame, one that moves and flickers with the Earth's breath. Hydrothermal vents themselves don't last forever. They can erupt, collapse, or shift. Entire ecosystems may disappear or reappear over years or decades, but the bacteria return, the animals recolonize. There's even evidence that some larvae can drift hundreds of kilometers through the deep sea, searching for a new vent to call home, navigating by chemical cues, drawn to the faintest whispers of warmth and sulfur. And these are not isolated curiosities. In the decades since that first discovery, dozens of vent fields have been found around the world, along mid-ocean ridges, back-arc basins and subduction zones. They come in many varieties: black smokers that jet dense, dark clouds, white smokers that ooze lighter minerals, alkaline vents with chimney-like towers built from calcium. Each one is its own neighbourhood of oddities. Each one tells a different story of chemistry, pressure and time. But perhaps the most profound part of all this isn't just what was found, but how it made scientists rethink life itself. Before hydrothermal vents, the question, what is life, had relatively simple answers. Things that breathe, that move, that eat light or its consequences. After the vents, those answers became much less clear. Here were entire ecosystems powered not by photosynthesis, but by geochemistry. Not through the grace of sunshine, but by the Earth's inner heat. It suggested something radical, that life might not be rare, that it might not require the gentle balance of atmosphere, light and land, that it might arise wherever there is energy and chemistry and a little time. And if that's true, then the universe might be less lonely than we thought. Even now, scientists are still discovering new species in these deep vent communities. Bacteria that process metals, archaea that thrive at near-boiling temperatures, viruses that prey on microbes in ways we don't yet understand. Each new dive uncovers more questions than answers, and each one reinforces a strange, quiet truth. We live on a planet that hasn't finished revealing itself. So as you rest here in this story, think about that. Somewhere right now, far beneath the waves, where it's dark and cold and forgotten, there are chimneys belching heat into the sea. Around them life swirls, not desperately but confidently, as if it has always belonged, because it has. In the next session, we'll meet some of the most otherworldly creatures of the deep. Transparent predators, glowing tricksters, and beings so strange they feel like dreams drifting just beyond the edge of vision. But for now, linger here with the tube worms, with the bacteria that never see the sun, with the idea that maybe, just maybe, life doesn't need to begin in the light. Close your eyes, if they aren't already. Imagine drifting just above the seafloor, thousands of meters down, in a place where sunlight has never touched. It is still here, so still that you can hear your own thoughts in the silence. The darkness isn't empty. It wraps around you like a blanket, vast and soft and endless. And then, suddenly, something moves. Not a shadow, but a shimmer. A pulse of light, quick and quiet, blooming in the dark like a breath. Another pulse answers it. Then a flash. Blue, green, red. And for a moment, the ocean isn't dark at all. It's a theatre. A dance of light and silence. A communication not of words, but of glow. You are. Now in the company of creatures that don't just survive here, they perform. Bioluminescence is the language of the deep. In a world without sun or moon, light is both message and mask. Some creatures glow to attract mates, others to lure prey. Some flash to startle predators, while others disappear entirely, cloaking themselves in patterns that cancel their own silhouettes. It's camouflage, but not like the stripes of a tiger or the mottled skin of a frog. It's camouflage in light itself, shadows made of stars. The flashlight fish, for instance, carries glowing bacteria under its eyes, flicking them on and off like lanterns. The anglerfish dangles a glowing lure from its forehead, attracting the curious with a promise of brightness in the dark. The hatchetfish uses bioluminescent organs on its belly to match the faint light from above, rendering itself nearly invisible to anything looking up. This is not just adaptation. It is choreography. And then there are creatures who seem almost entirely transparent. Glass octopuses, ghost fish, jellies that shimmer like spun air. You can see their organs, sometimes even the flicker of neurons firing. They float. Not like living animals, but like ideas. Loose sketches of life drawn in water. They don't resist the deep. They yield to it, become part of it. They don't build shelters. They are the shelter. Some jellies are nearly immortal. Turritopsis dorni, the so-called immortal jellyfish, can revert to an earlier stage of its life cycle when damaged, essentially starting over, a loop of rebirth that defies our tidy ideas of aging. In labs and oceans alike, it cycles back again and again, as if time is just another current it can slip away from. This isn't magic, it's biology. But it feels like a story we weren't supposed to find the ending to. Among these dreamlike forms, few are as astonishing as the octopus, especially those that dwell in the deep sea. They're not just smart, they're strange in ways that intelligence rarely is. Their bodies are soft, fluid, and boneless. Their arms can think for themselves, each containing clusters of neurons that allow independent movement, sensation, and even decision-making. Their skin can change colour, texture, and reflectivity within milliseconds. Some seem to vanish against a backdrop of sand or rock. Others pulse with colour in waves that mimic light on water, patterns not seen but felt. Cuttlefish are equally miraculous. They use a combination of pigment sacs, light-reflecting cells, and muscular control to paint themselves in perfect mimicry of their surroundings. Scientists still don't fully understand how they perceive their environment well enough to match it, nor how they control their transformations with such speed. But the result is something uncanny, like watching liquid intelligence solve problems through art. And yet, what makes these creatures truly alien isn't just how they look, it's how they think. Their brains are nothing like ours. Their ancestors diverged from the vertebrate line more than 500 million years ago. They don't share our structures, our social behaviour, our vocalizations, but they play. They solve puzzles. They escape enclosures, remember patterns and explore objects with curiosity that seems, at times, almost human. But they're not human. They're something else. Intelligence shaped by tentacles, suction cups, and a world of fluid pressure and silence. Intelligence that doesn't need speech or fire or cities to be real. And this brings us to a quiet idea, one that's easy to miss but powerful to hold. If we're searching the cosmos for alien minds, we may not need to look so far. The aliens might already be here, not in flying saucers, but in cold trenches, in the twilight zone of the sea, in arms that think and skins that speak in colour. They're not visitors from another planet. They are the planet shaped by a different path, following rules we're only beginning to recognise. What if deep-sea creatures are our first real encounter with a truly different intelligence? What if they are a mirror, not of ourselves, but of what life could be? Not everything needs to build a rocket to be wise. Not everything that thinks has hands or a voice. Some thoughts are written in light and movement. Some dreams swim. And perhaps, in the deepest places, it isn't that life becomes alien. It's that it becomes more itself. More distilled. More honest. No pretense. No excess. Just survival. Perception. And the strange grace of being alive in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. These animals don't live in spite of the darkness. They are the darkness, flickering and moving through it like ideas that never had to explain themselves. So let's not be too quick to dismiss the deep as inhospitable. Let's not frame it as merely hostile or other. It's unfamiliar, yes, but it's also ancient and rich and quietly extraordinary. In our next session, we'll meet creatures that challenge the very framework of biology itself. Organisms that survive in boiling acid, that don't use oxygen, and in some cases may not use DNA in any way we understand. Life that shouldn't exist, and yet does. But for now, float here, in the glow, among the shapeshifters and silent thinkers. Let them pass around you, unconcerned. You're not intruding, you're only drifting through their story. Imagine standing in a museum filled with glass cases of life, each specimen carefully labelled: mammal, reptile, fungus, plant, microbe. The rules are simple. Life breathes oxygen, it uses DNA, it needs warmth, water, and stability. But then, in one of the corners, there's a small locked drawer, and when opened, it doesn't contain fossils or bones. It holds contradictions, living things that break the rules. That drawer is the deep sea, and it's not small at all. Most of us grew up with a fairly tidy idea of what life means. Cells, metabolism, reproduction, oxygen for breath, sunlight or food for energy, a reliance on water and moderate temperatures. But when scientists began exploring the deep ocean, not just around hydrothermal vents, but within sediments, crustal rocks, and underwater volcanic systems, they found organisms that pushed at the very boundaries of that idea. Creatures that didn't just adapt to extremes, but thrived in them. Life that shouldn't exist, and yet does. Start with heat. Near hydrothermal vents, water doesn't just warm, it boils. It shoots out of the earth at temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius. Under the immense pressure of the deep sea, this water doesn't turn to steam, but stays liquid, infused with metals and sulfur. For most known life, such conditions would be fatal. Proteins denature, membranes collapse. But here, we find thermophiles, heat-loving microbes that function perfectly at temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius. Some even continue to grow at 121 degrees Celsius, the same temperature we use to sterilize medical equipment. These organisms have specially adapted enzymes and cellular structures that remain stable at temperatures that would melt the building blocks of ordinary life. Instead of falling apart, their machinery tightens. Their membranes resist chaos. Their DNA, if they even use it in familiar forms, is stabilised by proteins that act like scaffolding. They don't just endure, they flourish. Then there's acid. At volcanic seeps and mud volcanoes, the pH can plunge to levels comparable to battery acid. Yet acidophiles live here too, bacteria and archaea that not only tolerate acidity but require it. They've adapted their internal chemistry so thoroughly that neutral water would kill them. The walls of their cells are armoured against the proton floods that would dissolve others. They are not just surviving harshness, they are sculpted by it. At the opposite end, in the cold, there are psychrophiles, microbes that remain flexible, fluid, and alive at temperatures near freezing. Instead of freezing solid, their membranes contain antifreeze proteins. Their enzymes work slowly but efficiently. They may live in the brine channels of sea ice, or buried beneath kilometres of permafrost. Their pace is glacial, but it is still life. Then come the pressure lovers, the barophiles or piezophiles, organisms that require intense pressure to function at all. Take them out of their crushing world and they don't sigh in relief. They unravel. Their proteins misfold. Their membranes become unstable. For them, the deep isn't a burden. It's a home. They are not crushed by the sea. They are shaped by it. But even these extremes, heat, acid, cold, pressure, are still rooted in familiar chemistry. Where things get truly strange is in the realm of oxygen and genetics. Some deep-sea microbes live entirely without oxygen, not just for a few hours or in a dormant state, but permanently. They use sulfur, nitrate, or even iron as terminal electron acceptors in their metabolism. In other words, they breathe rocks, they ferment minerals. Their biochemistry is alien in form but not in function. They still process energy. But they do it without lungs, blood, or air. To them, oxygen is unnecessary, perhaps even toxic. Even more curiously, there are hints, still under study, that some microbes may rely on alternative genetic systems. While DNA and RNA remain the standard blueprint for life as we know it, a few organisms appear to use unusual bases, modified sugars, or even entirely different scaffolding molecules in extreme conditions. Some may preserve their genetic material not with phosphate-based backbones, but with more stable chemical groups that resist hydrolysis. It's not yet conclusive, but it whispers of a possibility that there are versions of life we have not yet categorized because we didn't think to look for them. And here's the most astonishing part. Many of these organisms don't live near the surface of the seafloor. They live within it, in the rock, in the sediment, in pores and fractures so small they might hold only a few cells, isolated for centuries or millennia. The deep biosphere is a term scientists use to describe this hidden ecosystem beneath the ocean floor. It may contain more biomass than all surface animals combined, and yet it's largely invisible, silent, and slow. Some of these microbes divide once every 100 years. Others seem to exist in a suspended state, consuming trace nutrients so slowly that their lives unfold like a whisper. If speed defines modern life, these organisms are a form of living patience. They are the monks of the earth, quiet and buried, praying in chemical language to no one in particular. So what is life, really? Is it a cell with DNA, a beating heart, a spark of motion? Or is it something broader, something that continues, adapts, and persists in forms we barely recognise? If life can exist in boiling acid, without oxygen, under rock and time and silence, then the definition must stretch. It must include not just what we see, but what we almost missed. It must leave room for things that should not exist but do. And perhaps, as we explore other planets, we should remember that our own holds organisms we don't yet understand. Before we expect to recognise alien life elsewhere, we must first acknowledge that Earth itself remains deeply, vibrantly strange. In our next part, we'll pull back just a little from these microscopic lives and look at the grander rhythms of the ocean itself, Not just creatures, but systems, rivers that flow within water, currents that move heat, and a planetary heartbeat that stirs beneath every wave. But for now, rest with these impossible beings. Let them remind you that life is not a list. It's not a rule book. It's a story. And the ocean is still writing it. If you could peel back the ocean like a bedsheet, gently lifting away the water to expose the hidden skin beneath, you might expect to find a quiet floor, flat, still, long settled. But what lies there isn't a carpet of stone. It's a place in motion, not fast, not loud, but constant. Beneath the waves, the earth is always remaking itself, building, stretching, cracking, and folding back inward. The seafloor is not just where the ocean ends, it's where the planet breathes. In the very centre of our ocean basins run great underwater mountain chains called mid-ocean ridges, long continuous lines of volcanic activity that stretch for tens of thousands of kilometres. The mid-Atlantic ridge, for example, cuts the Atlantic in two, like a slowly healing wound. It's not dramatic to the eye. If you were to swim above it, you'd see ridges, perhaps some faint plumes of warmth rising. But below, in the rock, something quiet and immense is happening. Magma from deep within Earth's mantle pushes upward, splits the crust, and creates new ocean floor. This is Earth's crustal nursery. Here, rock is born. Not all at once, not in great explosions, but in steady, glowing trickles. Lava cools into basalt. New seabed is formed, and as more comes up, the older crust is pushed outward, like pages slowly turning in a thick planetary book. The ocean basins grow wider, but the Earth does not grow larger. So where does the old crust go? It dies. But not in the way we do. At the edges of some continents, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, the seafloor descends again into the deep. These are subduction zones, deep oceanic trenches where the crust is pulled back into the mantle, reheated, reabsorbed. The Pacific plate, for instance, is slowly sliding beneath the western edge of South America, creating the Pru-Chile Trench. Where it dives down, earthquakes ripple through the crust, and volcanoes rise in arcs along the overriding plate. This is Earth's recycling system, a massive conveyor belt of creation and destruction, invisibly operating for millions of years beneath the sea. It is one of the reasons why oceanic crust is younger than the land. While some rocks on continents are over 4 billion years old, the oldest seafloor is less than 200 million. The ocean erases its past, tucks it under, makes space for new beginnings. The land keeps its scars. The sea quietly cleanses its own slate. And yet, these movements are not slow in consequence. They are the drivers of some of Earth's most powerful events. Earthquakes, deep and rolling, can be triggered by the grinding of tectonic plates under the sea. Tsunamis, born from sudden shifts in the seafloor, can race across oceans faster than jetliners, rising to deadly heights as they reach shore. And undersea volcanoes, though often unseen, are more numerous than those on land. Some create new islands, others stay hidden, building underwater mountains that never quite reach the surface. In 2022, an undersea volcano near Tonga erupted with such force that it sent shockwaves around the planet and changed atmospheric pressure for days. Most of the eruption happened beneath the sea, but its effects were global, a reminder, just because we cannot see something doesn't mean it isn't there, or that it cannot shake the sky. The ocean floor is full of these quiet upheavals. It's not a passive bed for marine life. It is the stage, the architect, the restless builder beneath the world. And even though it moves slowly, often just a few centimetres per year, its cumulative force reshapes continents and stirs the deep time rhythm of our planet. These processes don't ask for our attention. They happen whether we listen or not. But when we do pay attention, when we send seismometers to the bottom, or drill cores from the crust, or map the shifting of plates across decades, we begin to see the ocean not as a flat surface, but as a dynamic shell, one that is constantly peeling and layering, like the crust of a living loaf of bread, warm beneath, ever turning, always changing. There's a kind of comfort in that slowness, a reminder that not everything rushes, not all change is sudden. Some change takes 1,000,000 years to lift a mountain or draw a new coastline. It happens beneath everything else, in the background of history, beneath the waves, below the memory of our species. It has shaped the earth long before we stood upright, and it will continue long after we sleep. So the next time you look at a world map and see the oceans as blue voids between the land, remember, they are not voids, they are factories, archives, fault lines, cradles. They are places where the earth remakes itself with such steadiness that we barely notice. In the next session, we'll explore what gets buried in all this motion, layers of sediment that capture the passing of time like soft pages in a planetary diary. We'll see how the ocean remembers even what the land forgets. But for now, float here a moment longer, over the quiet ridges and deep trenches, knowing that beneath your feet, the world is always beginning again. If you were to hold a piece of the seafloor in your hands, not the rock, but the soft, fine sediment that blankets it, you might be surprised by how ordinary it looks, like greyish clay or pale dust, smooth and forgettable. But hidden in that nondescript sliver of seafloor is something remarkable. That handful of mud could contain a record of Earth's memory, layered gently over millions of years. Because the ocean doesn't just flow and move, it remembers. Every year, particles fall from the surface of the sea like a silent drifting snowfall. Tiny shells from plankton, flakes of dead organisms, bits of dust carried by wind from deserts across the globe. Volcanic ash, fragments of meteorites, microscopic pollen, grains of sand stirred by underwater landslides. It all drifts downward, some of it taking weeks, some of it taking centuries, before finally settling onto the ocean floor. Once there, these fragments begin to layer, quietly, consistently, sometimes just a millimetre a century, into a sedimentary journal of the Earth's past. And it turns out these layers can be read. Through ocean drilling programs, vast international efforts that send ships out to sea with drilling rigs and precision instruments, we've begun to pull cores from the sea floor. Each core is a long cylindrical column of mud and sediment, often several metres in length, extracted carefully from deep beneath the surface. They are in essence scrolls of time, not written in ink but in chemistry, colour and microfossils. What scientists find inside them is breathtaking. There are traces of ancient climates, recorded in the isotopic ratios of oxygen in tiny shells. The ratio of heavy to light oxygen isotopes in those shells tells us how cold or warm the ocean was when the organism lived. By comparing these layers over depth and thus over time, researchers can reconstruct the swings between ice ages and interglacial periods, tracking the slow rhythm of Earth's climate heartbeat over hundreds of thousands of years. There are layers of ash, pinpointing massive volcanic eruptions that blanketed the globe in soot. Some are from known events, like the Toba eruption in Indonesia, or the more recent Mount Tambora. Others hint at eruptions still unaccounted for in historical records, sleeping disasters that shaped the air and weather long before we wrote anything down. Then there are impact layers, thin bands enriched in iridium, a rare metal more common in meteorites than in Earth's crust. The most famous of these marks the end of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago, the time when the dinosaurs disappeared. That slender dark line in a seafloor core is the quiet, dusty echo of a global catastrophe. Beyond catastrophes, the sediment also whispers of slower shifts, the rise and fall of species visible in the presence or absence of certain foraminifera and diatoms, microscopic sea creatures whose skeletons tell us not just what lived, but what the oceans were like when they lived. Changes in sediment colour may indicate changes in ocean currents, wind patterns or oxygen levels. Buried pollen grains from nearby continents tell stories of forests expanding or contracting, deserts growing or retreating. These stories aren't just old, they're deeply connected. The ocean is a global system. Changes in one part affect another. The layers in the Pacific speak to winds in Africa. The sediments of the North Atlantic remember the melting of distant ice sheets. It's as if the ocean doesn't just remember locally, it remembers globally, holding a mirror to all the rhythms and ruptures of our Earth. But the reading of these cores is not fast. It is patient work. A single core may take years to fully analyse. Each grain of sediment must be examined under microscopes, tested with spectrometers, dated with radiometric techniques. It is slow, careful, decoding, less like reading a book and more like translating a dream. And yet, for all its slowness, this work has changed how we understand the planet. Before these ocean cores, our knowledge of Earth's past was patchy, limited to land-based records that were often disturbed by erosion, uplift or human development. But the ocean floor is more stable. Its sediments remain undisturbed for far longer. They accumulate in silence. And because the oceans cover most of the Earth, their memory is more complete. Thanks to these records, we now understand that climate change is not new. The Earth has swung between hothouses and icehouses many times. CO2 levels have risen and fallen. Sea levels have surged and shrunk. But what's different now is not that change is happening. It's how fast it's happening. The past changes were slow. Today's are compressed. The cores show us that we are accelerating a natural cycle at a pace the planet hasn't seen before. And that insight isn't just scientific, it's emotional. To look into the Earth's deep memory is to feel a kind of reverence. These sediments remember things we've forgotten. They held the breath of mammoths, the dust of ancient fires, the fingerprints of a planet learning to live. They are not history written by humans. They are history written by the Earth, in its own language, in its own time. And now we're listening. In the next session, we'll explore the landscapes where all this memory rests. The vast underwater valleys and mountains, the rivers that move through the darkness, carving canyons of mud and fossils through the silence. But for now, imagine a speck of dust falling gently, slowly onto the ocean floor. It lands, settles, and becomes part of a story that might not be read for 1,000,000 years. That is the patience of water. That is the memory of the sea. It's easy, from where we sit on land, to picture the ocean floor as something smooth and empty, a flat plain stretching endlessly, dark and undisturbed, like the bottom of a still swimming pool. But if you could travel across it, not just in a straight dive, but laterally, slowly, across kilometres of sea floor, you'd discover something far more dramatic. The bottom of the ocean is not flat. It is wild. It is contoured. It is full of mountains taller than Everest, canyons deeper than anything on land, and rivers that move not with water, but with sediment and time. Let's begin with the abyssal plains, vast stretches of ocean floor that are in some places remarkably flat. They lie between 3,000 and 6,000 metres deep, and they're often described as featureless. But even these plains are punctuated with life and landforms. Scattered across them are seamounts, underwater mountains formed by ancient or active volcanoes. Some of these peaks rise thousands of metres from the sea floor. Many are extinct volcanoes whose tips never quite broke the surface. Others are younger, still, quietly growing, one slow eruption at a time. Seamounts are biodiversity hotspots. Their slopes deflect ocean currents upward, bringing nutrients from the depths and attracting life in abundance. Corals, fish, invertebrates, sometimes even whales. They are oases in the underwater desert. But they are also invisible on most maps. Satellites can't see them directly through water, and sonar mapping has only covered a small percentage of the ocean floor. It's estimated that there may be more than 100,000 seamounts, taller than 1,000 meters, most of them unmapped, unvisited, and unnamed. Imagine mountain ranges larger than the Rockies, hidden beneath miles of water, unknown to all but the creatures who live there. Then there are the trenches, deep scars in the seafloor where tectonic plates meet, and one is forced beneath the other. The Mariana Trench, the deepest of them all, reaches nearly 11,000 meters down at its lowest point, the Challenger Deep. That's deeper than any mountain is tall. If Mount Everest were placed at the bottom of the trench, its summit would still be more than 2 kilometers underwater. These trenches are narrow, sharp-edged and silent. They're shaped not just by geologic force, but by absence, places where the earth pulls itself inward. You might expect these trenches to be lifeless, but they are not. Even in the deepest places we've reached, life has been found. Shrimp-like amphipods, translucent snailfish, microbial mats, and tiny pressure-hardened creatures that drift through this blackness like whispers. Every time we dive into these depths, we discover something new, and every time we realise how much more there is we haven't yet seen. But perhaps the most surprising landscapes of the ocean are its canyons and rivers. Along continental margins, where land meets sea, there are immense submarine canyons, some of which rival or exceed the size of the Grand Canyon. The Monterey Canyon off the coast of California, for example, stretches over 150 kilometers long and plunges more than 3,600 meters deep. These canyons were not carved by wind or glaciers, but by ancient and ongoing flows of sediment. These flows, called turbidity currents, are underwater avalanches, sudden rushes of sand, silt, clay, and organic material that tumble downslope, driven by gravity and density differences. They can move faster than a car on a highway, travelling for hundreds of kilometres, sculpting valleys and channels as they go. When the dust settles, what's left behind is a submarine riverbed, quiet and fossil-laden. Layer by layer, these rivers deposit records of ancient coastlines, drowned forests, and vanished ecosystems. Unlike rivers on land, these currents don't flow with water, they are the water, or rather dense clouds of material suspended within it. In the darkness they move unseen, yet their impact is profound. They shape continental slopes, they bury cables and break equipment, they preserve the history of coastlines long gone. In some canyons you can find sedimentary fans, vast fan-shaped spreads of mud and microfossils that extend for miles into the deep ocean, like the slow breath of the continent reaching outward. And then, scattered across all these features, are the fracture zones, scars left behind by tectonic movement. These aren't always visible as ridges or valleys, but they mark where the crust has been stretched or twisted, forming deep linear gashes that can run for thousands of kilometres. Some look like the fingerprints of Earth itself, pressed gently but permanently into the crust. All of this, the mountains, the trenches, the rivers, the plains, exists beneath us, mostly unmapped, mostly unexplored. If you were to take the same level of detail we've used to map the surface of Mars or the Moon, and apply it to Earth's seafloor, you'd quickly realise how much we've left blank. The ocean hides not because it wants to, but because we haven't yet looked closely enough. And this matters, because these landscapes aren't static. They move. The canyons deepen, the seamounts grow, the trenches shift, the currents change direction, the sediments shift, fossils get buried, rocks fracture. The ocean floor is not the end of a journey. It's the beginning of a quiet process that moves continents and reshapes the planet, millimetre by millimetre, century by century. So the next time you picture the ocean, don't imagine an empty blue. Imagine an unseen world of cliffs and valleys, of slow rivers and hidden peaks. Imagine a landscape vast enough to hide entire mountain ranges and still have room left over. Imagine a world you could walk through, If only you could breathe underwater and bear the pressure of silence. In the next part of our journey, we'll look upward, not to the surface, but into the water itself. Because the ocean isn't still, it flows, it stirs. Beneath the waves, currents move like slow winds, carrying heat, salt, and life across the planet in patterns older than maps. But before we move with the water, let's rest a moment here, in the stillness of valleys that few have seen, on the slopes of underwater mountains no one has climbed, in the deep folds of a planet still shaping itself in the dark. If you were to float silently above the surface of the ocean, it might seem like nothing is moving. A still blue sheet stretching in every direction. But if you could somehow press your hand into that water and follow it, not just downward, but across continents, between poles, under ice shelves and into the sunlit shallows, you'd begin to feel it. A slow pull, a planetary breath. The ocean moves, not in sudden gusts or crashing tides, but in immense continuous rivers of water that flow within water, currents that wrap around the world. The most famous of these is the Gulf Stream, a powerful surface current that starts near the tip of Florida, arcs across the Atlantic and gently warms the coasts of Western Europe. It is part of a vast system of moving water that helps regulate global temperatures, keeping some places cooler than they would be and others warmer than they have any right to be. Without the Gulf Stream, the British Isles might feel more like Siberia than spring. But the Gulf Stream is only one part of a much larger pattern. Around Antarctica flows the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the only current that circles the entire globe uninterrupted by land. It acts like a planetary gear, locking the Southern Ocean into a spinning belt of cold water that helps isolate the continent in ice. This current helps shape not just Antarctica, but climates as far away as the equator. Below the surface there is another world of motion, slower, deeper, colder. This is the thermohaline circulation, sometimes called the global conveyor belt. It begins with surface water near Greenland or Antarctica cooling, increasing in salinity as ice forms, and sinking. This cold, dense water begins to flow along the ocean floor, travelling across entire basins. Some of it eventually wells up in the Indian or Pacific Oceans, where it is warmed by the sun, rises, and returns along the surface to the North Atlantic, completing a cycle that can take 1,000 years. This is not a current in the way a river is a current. It is the deep heartbeat of the ocean, a pulse that moves water, nutrients, oxygen and heat across time and distance. Every drop of seawater you've touched may be part of this journey, cooling near icebergs, sliding across the abyssal plain, rising through equatorial eddies, returning with memory baked into its salt. Currents are not just about temperature, they are about transport. They carry nutrients, dead plankton, minerals, trace elements, up from the deep to nourish surface life in rich, upwelling zones like those off the coasts of Peru and California. Without these currents, the great fisheries of the world would collapse. Without them, the base of the food chain, tiny phytoplankton, would starve. They also carry oxygen, allowing deep-sea life to breathe even in the absence of sunlight. In places where currents slow or become blocked, oxygen drops and dead zones form. These are not just scientific observations, they are vital systems supporting billions of lives from the smallest shrimp to the largest whales. But perhaps the most extraordinary role of these currents is the way they link climate systems. When warm surface waters shift, when the Gulf Stream slows or the Pacific currents change direction, it can alter weather patterns across entire continents. Droughts in Africa, floods in Asia, heat waves in Europe. Changes in sea surface temperatures can trigger El Niño or La Niña events, oscillations that ripple through the atmosphere, shifting rainfall, harvests, storm tracks and ecosystems. These events may begin with a few degrees of ocean warmth, a barely perceptible shift, but the consequences can affect food prices in Brazil, wildfire seasons in Australia, and hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico. That's how interconnected it all is. The ocean doesn't just sit at the edge of human life, it flows through it. And yet, we understand only a fraction of it. We drop drifters and buoys, launch satellites to measure sea height and temperature, send autonomous gliders through eddies. But much of the deep ocean circulation remains mysterious. There are entire branches of the global conveyor belt we have only glimpsed. There are underwater passages, perhaps even under polar ice, where cold water moves like a forgotten thought, slow, unseen, and steady. What's most poetic about these currents is their persistence. Unlike weather, which flickers and changes, or ecosystems, which grow and vanish, ocean currents endure. They have flowed for millions of years, shaped by the slow choreography of salinity, temperature, and wind. They do not rush, they do not stop, and they remember. You might think of them as the bloodstream of the planet, not red and pulsing, but blue and endless, carrying heat instead of oxygen, stories instead of cells. The Gulf Stream in this metaphor is a great artery. The deep currents are veins that loop around the bones of the earth. The eddies and surface flows are capillaries, fluttering at the edges of reefs and coastlines. And the Antarctic circumpolar current. That's the heart's slow rhythm, keeping the whole thing alive. In our next session, we'll drift deeper into this idea, that the ocean, with its slow reactions and vast memory, might be thought of as a kind of planetary mind. It doesn't think the way we do, but it does respond. It does remember. It holds on to changes for centuries. But before we descend into that thought, pause here, in the current. Let it carry you. Let it remind you that movement doesn't always mean speed. Sometimes it just means persistence. Picture a conversation so slow that a full sentence takes 1,000 years to form. A question might take place over an entire ice age. A reply might arrive after continents have shifted, forests have risen and fallen, and civilizations have come and gone. This is how the ocean speaks, not in the chatter of winds or the flicker of fire, but in deep, slow rhythms that stretch beyond a single lifetime. It doesn't shout, it murmurs, and if we listen closely enough, we begin to hear it thinking. At the heart of this quiet thought is something called thermohaline circulation, the great conveyor belt of the deep ocean, where dense, cold water sinks near the poles and begins a journey that can take centuries to complete. As this water sinks, it pulls with it carbon, heat, and the memory of its surface origin. It slides along the seafloor like a careful idea, unfolding not in moments, but in eras. A drop of water that descends near Greenland today might not rise again in the Pacific for 1,000 years. In that time, it will have drifted under entire oceans, skirted continental shelves, flowed beneath storms and monsoons, and carried with it the fingerprints of a world long past. It remembers the temperature of its birth, the saltiness of its descent, the carbon it absorbed. It is, in a very real way, a vessel of memory. And this is not poetic imagination. Oceanographers measure it. They sample deep currents and compare their composition with models of circulation. They find water masses that are centuries old, unchanged in their salinity or chemistry, untouched by the surface. These are the ocean's long thoughts, waiting beneath the turbulence of the world. But the ocean's memory is not passive. It responds, slowly, yes, but profoundly. When ice melts in the Arctic, it sends a fresh lens of water onto the North Atlantic. This disrupts the salinity balance that drives deep water formation. Less salt means less sinking. Less sinking means the conveyor belt slows, and when it slows, the entire system shifts. Regions that once received warm currents cool, monsoons change timing, hurricanes strengthen, fisheries collapse or migrate. What begins as a quiet change in density becomes a rearrangement of planetary behaviour. This is how the ocean thinks, not through sudden decisions but through feedback. A small change here becomes a large effect there, A melted glacier becomes a failed crop. A warmed current becomes a vanished reef. And because the ocean moves slowly, it also responds slowly. This is one of the most important and most dangerous truths about the sea. It doesn't react in real time. It absorbs and stores. It buffers. When we fill the atmosphere with carbon dioxide, the ocean begins to take it in, gradually through diffusion at the surface and more deeply through biological and physical mixing. Over time, this buffering helps delay the worst impacts of warming, but it also creates inertia. Once the ocean has absorbed the heat, it continues to release it slowly, like a vast thermal battery. Even if emissions were halted, the sea would continue warming for decades. This is what scientists mean when they say the ocean has committed warming. It's not about the choices we make tomorrow. It's about the choices we made 50 years ago, and the ocean is still replying. This lag in response is also why some of the most dramatic changes in climate come not during the action, but after. At the end of the last ice age, for example, Earth warmed slowly and then suddenly. As ancient glaciers melted, fresh water poured into the ocean, disturbing circulation patterns and triggering rapid shifts. The rise in temperature was not linear. It was lurching, punctuated by sudden, massive changes that left ecosystems scrambling to adapt. And we may be heading towards such a moment now. Not because the ocean is volatile, but because it is steady. It has absorbed so much, carried so much, remembered so much, that its eventual reply may be overwhelming. Not because it's angry, but because it has no choice. Like a glacier reaching the edge of its ledge, the sea can only delay the inevitable for so long. It's tempting to think of Earth's systems as reactive, that if we change our behaviour, the planet will immediately shift in kind. But the ocean reminds us that nature doesn't operate on our schedule. It moves to its own rhythm, measured not in days, but in centuries. We're not steering a car. We're nudging a moon-sized pendulum that takes generations to change course. And yet, there's something humbling in that. Something grounding. The ocean isn't vengeful. It doesn't punish. It simply responds with integrity to every push we give it. That means it will respond to care just as surely as it responds to damage. If we give it time and reduce the pressure, it will shift. Not tomorrow, but someday. And perhaps that's enough to begin with. Because in its slowness, the ocean teaches us something rare in modern life. Patience. In a world of urgency, it holds space for the long view. In a society built on reaction, it invites contemplation. And as it flows beneath us, as it carries its ancient waters from one end of the earth to another, it reminds us that not all thinking is fast. Some thought is slow, some memory is quiet, some understanding takes 1,000 years to reach the surface. In the next session, we'll bring this idea back to ourselves. How this ancient system, so vast and unconcerned, continues to shape every part of human life. But for now, let yourself drift in this knowledge. The ocean is not just water. It is time. It is memory. It is a thought still unfolding. Every breath you take has passed over the ocean. Every cloud you've seen, every rainfall you've felt, every field of grain or rice or corn that's ever been harvested, it all carries the signature of the sea. We live, from our first moments to our last, within systems shaped by something we rarely see. The ocean does not just sit in the background of human life. It supports it, nourishes it, even defines its possibility. And yet, somehow it remains almost entirely outside our daily awareness. That's the strange paradox of our relationship with the sea. We depend on it more deeply than we understand, and we often treat it as though it were disposable. Begin with carbon. Since the start of the industrial age, humans have released vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, burning coal, oil, and gas to power cities, vehicles, industries, and lives. The atmosphere holds part of that carbon, yes, but the ocean holds more. Roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of the carbon we emit each year is absorbed by the sea. It enters at the surface, dissolving into the water, where it alters the chemistry ever so slightly, dropping the pH, making the ocean more acidic. This acidification is slow, quiet, and largely invisible, but its consequences ripple outward. Shell building. Organisms like corals, plankton, and mollusks struggle to form the calcium carbonate structures they rely on. Coral reefs begin to bleach and die. The very base of the food web starts to shift. This isn't a dramatic overnight collapse. It's a slow erosion, a quiet fraying of the fabric that holds life together in the ocean, and by extension, on land. Beyond carbon, the ocean regulates weather. It stores heat more efficiently than the atmosphere, distributing it across latitudes and seasons. It powers the water cycle through evaporation, seeding clouds that drift over continents and fall as rain or snow. In tropical regions, the warmth of surface waters fuels cyclones and hurricanes. In polar regions, the presence of cold sea ice stabilizes climate and reflects sunlight. The ocean does not just respond to weather, it helps create it. Then there's food. More than 3 billion people rely on seafood as a primary source of protein. Vast fisheries stretch across the world's coasts and open oceans, catching not just fish, but also squid, shrimp, seaweed, and more. Small island nations, coastal communities, and entire economies depend on the rhythm of the ocean's productivity. When currents shift, when temperatures rise, when oxygen declines, fish move, populations dwindle, and human lives are affected, often without warning. Even transportation and trade still lean on the sea. Cargo ships thread across its surface in tight, organised routes, connecting the economies of continents. Underneath those routes lie internet cables, invisible threads that carry the bulk of the world's digital communications. The global internet quite literally flows through the ocean. Every message you send, every video you stream, every call you make may have passed through cables lying silently on the seabed. And yet, for all this dependence, there is an enduring sense that the ocean is somehow separate, that it is too large to harm, too deep to exhaust, too distant to feel personal. This illusion has allowed us to treat the sea as a dumping ground for plastic, for chemical waste, for excess heat and carbon. We overfish, dredge, mine, and spill, as though the damage will disappear into the blue, as though the ocean is infinite in its capacity to forgive. But it isn't. The signs are appearing. Coral reefs vanishing, fish stocks declining, coastal storms intensifying, sea levels rising. These are not just stories of marine science. They are stories of human time. They affect agriculture, migration, economics, health, and culture. In many parts of the world, especially in vulnerable coastal regions, people are already being forced to adapt, to relocate, to find new food sources, to rebuild their homes farther from the water. Still, the ocean does not act with malice. It has no agenda, no awareness of harm or mercy. It is simply following the energy, the temperature, the chemistry we've introduced. It does not need us. It did not evolve to serve us. It will outlive us, just as it outlived the trilobites and the dinosaurs and every vanished species that once swam in its depths. But we cannot outlive it. Without the ocean, there is no climate stability, no global rainfall, no regulation of heat or oxygen, no vast cradle of biodiversity. We are not passengers on a planet with an ocean. We are its children, born of its chemistry, fed by its currents, shaped by its rhythms. And if we forget that, if we treat the ocean as if it were outside us rather than within and around us, we risk severing the very connection that makes life on Earth possible. And yet, even now, it's not too late. The ocean is damaged, but not broken. It retains a vast capacity for regeneration. Coral reefs can recover if given time and protection. Fish populations can rebound if given safe refuge. Carbon levels can be stabilised if emissions are reduced. The ocean is slow to change, yes, But that slowness works in both directions. Just as it takes time for harm to register, it takes time for healing to appear. But healing is possible, and perhaps most beautifully, the ocean does not hold grudges. It doesn't remember pain the way we do. It remembers through data, salinity, temperature, circulation. If we give it better numbers, it will respond with better patterns. If we let it breathe, it will breathe for us. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore something even deeper, not physically, but philosophically. The way the ocean might be understood not just as a system or a space, but as a kind of consciousness. A planetary intelligence that thinks without neurons, that dreams without sleep, that speaks not in words but in movement, memory and flow. But for now, rest with this. The ocean has always been with you. It is part of your blood, your breath, your weather. You are made, in large part, of its past, and if we're gentle, its future may yet include us. You've probably heard it before, that more than 90% of the ocean remains unexplored. It's one of those facts that gets passed around, repeated with awe and sometimes disbelief. In an age where satellites orbit every hour, where maps exist of galaxies trillions of miles away, how can we still know so little about the planet beneath our feet? The answer isn't just about pressure or technology. It's about attention, it's about curiosity, and it's about the limits of what we choose to see. Let's start with the practical. The ocean is a difficult place to study. The deep sea is cold, near freezing in most places. It's dark, so dark that no sunlight penetrates beyond a few hundred meters. It's remote, sometimes hundreds or thousands of kilometers from the nearest land. And, perhaps most critically, it is subject to crushing pressure. For every 10 meters you descend, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. At the deepest points, that means more than 1,000 times the pressure you're experiencing right now. Most machines don't survive that. Most electronics fail. Most materials eventually deform, crack, or implode. So yes, part of the reason we haven't explored more is simply that it's hard. But difficulty alone doesn't explain our lack of effort. After all, we've gone to space. We've sent robots to Mars, probes to the outer planets, and telescopes to peer into the birth of galaxies. We've poured billions of dollars into climbing mountains, orbiting the moon, and photographing the surfaces of other worlds. And yet, when it comes to the ocean, right here on our own planet, we have barely scratched the surface. The reason is deeper than physics. It's cultural, economic, psychological. Unlike space, the ocean offers no panoramic vistas. You can't look at it from a distance and feel inspired in the same way you do when gazing at stars. Its beauty is often microscopic, fleeting, or hidden beneath layers of sediment. Deep-sea exploration rarely produces the kind of images that go viral. No colourful nebulae, no Earthrise over lunar soil. What it gives us is murk, mud, and mystery. And in a world that prioritises spectacle, that's often not enough. There's also an issue of return. Exploration is expensive. Submersibles, sonar mapping, deep-sea robotics all require massive investments. But what do we get in return? Scientific knowledge? Yes. New species sometimes. But rarely do we find something with clear commercial or strategic value. The ocean does not easily lend itself to colonization. You can't build cities on the seafloor. You can't plant flags in the abyss. And so, without the lure of conquest or immediate profit, many governments and institutions quietly turn away. But perhaps the most subtle barrier is what you might call conceptual fatigue. The deep ocean overwhelms us. It doesn't fit into neat categories. Its vastness feels unapproachable. It's hard to tell a story about something that stretches for thousands of kilometers in all directions and yet remains invisible to the eye. And so, we default to silence. If we can't see it, we don't think about it. If we can't think about it, we don't act. This isn't just a failure of infrastructure, it's a failure of imagination. Because here's the quiet truth. We choose what we explore. We choose where to look, and often we choose things that look like us. Landscapes that resemble deserts or mountains, planets with familiar horizons, spaces that mirror our own logic. The ocean, in contrast, is other. It resists metaphor. It swallows light. It is not just unexplored. It is uninterpretable in the ways we're used to. But maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's the point. Blank space doesn't mean empty space. It just means unmeasured. What we haven't mapped may still be teeming with life, shaped by ancient currents, filled with structures we have no names for. The 90% we haven't seen isn't dark because it refuses us. It's dark because we haven't gone. And perhaps we haven't gone because the ocean demands something we rarely practice. Patience without guarantee. You don't explore the ocean the way you explore a cave or a cliff. There is no trail, no stable ground, no fixed perspective. You drift, you wait, you listen, and sometimes nothing appears. Sometimes the journey ends not with revelation, but with a quiet reminder that not all mysteries are waiting to be solved. Some are waiting simply to be respected. There's a term that sometimes gets used in exploratory science. Epistemological humility. The recognition that our knowledge is limited, our frameworks are flawed, and our view of the world is shaped by what we are capable of perceiving. The ocean is a masterclass in that humility. It reminds us again and again that we are small, that our lights don't reach far, that our instruments cannot always decipher what moves silently in the deep. And yet, it also reminds us of something gentler, that wonder is still available, even when certainty is not. So the next time someone says, "We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about our own ocean," don't hear it as a failure. Hear it as an invitation to care more, to ask better questions, to embrace mystery not as a gap to be filled, but as a space to inhabit. Because the blank spaces on our maps are not errors. They are promises, they are pauses, they are the breath between what we've learned and what we have yet to imagine. In the next session, we'll dive into the nature of that resistance, the way the ocean actively defies the tidy metaphors and simple truths we often impose. But before we go there, rest for a moment in the idea that the unknown is not a void. It is a presence, quiet, deep, and still unfolding. We often think of the world as something that can be divided, defined, and eventually mastered. We name mountains, we draw borders across deserts, we trace the orbit of planets and log their chemical makeup. We like stories that start at a point and move forward. We like spaces that behave in predictable ways, solids with edges, distances that can be measured, maps that stay the same. But the ocean is none of these things. It is not fixed, it is not linear, and it does not reward our need for closure. On land, even in the most rugged terrain, you can usually find a sense of orientation. There is a direction, upward to peaks, downward to valleys. There are paths, ridgelines, watercourses. Even in a dense forest you can walk, feel gravity, follow the light. But the ocean is a realm in motion. There is no stable ground, no true horizon once you're beneath the surface. Down can shift with current. East and west blur as visibility drops. The boundaries are soft, overlapping, constantly redefined by temperature, salinity, and unseen flows. It does not behave like land, and it does not behave like space. Space is a vacuum, still, sparse, distant. While it is cold and harsh, it is also straightforward. Objects float, orbits can be predicted. Even chaos in space is governed by laws we can calculate. But the ocean is fluid chaos. Everything interacts with everything else. Heat moves through eddies. Salt builds gradients. Microscopic particles drift for miles, affecting visibility, chemistry, and biology in layers that shift hour by hour. No current stays the same. No two dives encounter the exact same sea. You can't draw a line around a current. You can't pin down where one water mass ends and another begins. In the open ocean there are fronts, not borders. Fuzzy, permeable zones where two systems meet and slowly trade molecules. It's not a wall, it's a conversation. And just when you think you've found a pattern, it moves. This resistance to clarity makes the ocean difficult to model and even harder to narrate. We like to tell stories with beginning, middle, and end, but the ocean is more like a loop, a spiral, a dream that changes shape as you try to describe it. In this way, it defies not just measurement, but metaphor. Try to compare it to a forest, and you lose the sense of movement. Try to call it an alien world, and you lose the fact that we are part of it. Try to frame it as a machine, and you miss its unpredictability. The ocean refuses to be simple, and in doing so, it asks us to let go of our usual ways of knowing. This can be deeply uncomfortable. We're used to conquering knowledge, to mastering systems. It's hard to admit when something cannot be tamed. The ocean won't be reduced to charts or diagrams, no matter how sophisticated. Yes, we can map seafloor ridges, we can track currents, plot nutrient cycles, and study ecosystems. But there is always more happening than we can capture. The ocean is a system whose full behaviour emerges only when you step back far enough, and even then it's always evolving. Ownership also fails here. You can't own the ocean in the way you can own land. Nations have exclusive economic zones, but they end. Beyond that lies the high seas, international waters where no single government rules. And even in coastal zones, control is partial. Fish migrate. Oil spills drift. Plastic floats from continent to continent. The ocean cannot be fenced, and it does not obey jurisdiction. It is perhaps the last truly unbounded space on Earth, and that's why, for many, it's uncomfortable. It's hard to protect what you can't define. It's hard to regulate what you can't model. It's hard to love what you can't fully grasp. But maybe that's exactly what makes the ocean so important. Not despite, but because it refuses to be simplified. There is a kind of knowledge that comes from complexity. Not the kind that leads to a product or a policy, but the kind that transforms the knower. When you engage with something too large to understand, you are humbled. You begin to sense the scale of life beyond your own. You loosen your grip on certainty. You learn to coexist with mystery, not because you've solved it, but because you've accepted it. And when we look at the sea, not just at its surface, but through it, into its depths, we are offered this transformation. It doesn't need to be simple. It doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be witnessed. Think of it like this. The ocean is not a place to be completed. It's a process, a motion, a system in constant revision. It doesn't want to be checked off or catalogued to the last creature. It wants to be met on its own terms, one patient moment at a time. And maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's freedom. In the next and final session of this part, we'll explore what it means to approach the ocean, not with maps and machines, but with humility. To imagine that the sea is not a challenge to overcome, but a presence to listen to. But before we go there, stay here for just a moment longer, in the drift. Let the idea settle. Not everything must be known. Some things must simply be felt. There is a certain silence that only the ocean knows. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, a kind of unspoken knowing, a stillness that waits rather than demands. We're used to environments that respond to us. Rooms light up when we enter, mountains echo our footsteps, even the night sky twinkles in reply to our gaze. But the ocean does not reply. It does not perform. It simply continues, vast and patient, whether we're paying attention or not. This is perhaps the final and most profound reason we've struggled to explore the ocean. It doesn't behave like a riddle to be solved. It doesn't offer itself as a puzzle, a mystery box, a hidden prize. It isn't hiding exactly, But it isn't reaching out either. It just is. It waits. And waiting, for many of us, is an unfamiliar posture. We are used to seeking, to solving, to grasping knowledge as if it were a fruit we could pluck once ripe. But the ocean asks us to listen, not with ears, but with time. What if the ocean is not meant to be conquered? What if exploration isn't always about arrival? What if some of the most important journeys are the ones that teach us to sit quietly with what we cannot hold? This may sound poetic, but it's also deeply practical. Many of the most powerful scientific discoveries in oceanography didn't come from bold expeditions or dramatic breakthroughs. They came from listening, placing a sensor in the water, returning year after year, watching a current change its course by 0.5 degree, noticing how plankton rise and fall with the moon, how sound travels differently in layers of warm and cold. It's the kind of science that doesn't rush. It waits. It notices. It lets the story reveal itself in glacial increments. In this way, the ocean doesn't reward dominance. It rewards relationship. To know the sea is to become part of a long conversation, one in which we are not the hero, not the narrator, but simply one more voice, brief, curious, willing to be changed. And this is a hard shift. So much of our relationship with the world has been shaped by conquest. Mountains are to be climbed, lands are to be settled, creatures are to be named, classified, displayed. But the ocean doesn't yield to that mindset. You cannot pin it down. You cannot walk across it. You cannot carry it home. Maybe that's why it has remained so unknowable. Because we've tried to treat it like a place, when it's actually more like a presence. A presence that resists quick understanding. That doesn't care if we figure it out. That doesn't need us to explain it in order to exist. And that shift from conquest to companionship is perhaps the most meaningful exploration we can do. What if the ocean is not waiting for us to solve it? What if it is simply waiting for us to listen well enough to hear what it's already saying? Listen. It says that life is possible in darkness, that warmth can come from the earth itself, that ecosystems can thrive without sunlight, without plants, without any of the structures we once thought essential. It says that intelligence can look like an octopus, not a human, that communication can glow instead of speak, that time can stretch across centuries and still matter. It says that complexity doesn't need to be simplified, that beauty doesn't need to be visible, that depth doesn't need to be filled. And if we really listen, if we let go of our maps, our metaphors, our need to measure and own, we may begin to understand that the ocean isn't teaching us about itself alone. It's teaching us about how we relate to the unknown. There is a quiet joy in this kind of listening, a relief even. Because in a world obsessed with certainty, with answers, with optimization and clarity, the ocean gives us permission to just be, to sit beside something ancient and not ask it to perform, to dwell in its presence without needing it to explain itself. This is the difference between exploration as domination and exploration as relationship. The former seeks to extract, the latter seeks to be with. And when it comes to the sea, its rhythms, its silences, its slow unfolding, being with is more than enough. Let this be a gentle invitation then, not to turn away from science, but to expand what science can be, to include listening, watching, waiting, to allow wonder, not just analysis, to hold space for mystery, not as a threat to knowledge, but as its partner. Perhaps the ocean is not a destination. Perhaps it is a companion, one that reminds us how to move slowly, how to ask better questions, how to remain open to answers we may never fully receive. And perhaps, if we learn to listen, we will find that the sea has never been silent at all. It has always been speaking, in waves and whispers, in currents and chemistry, in life forms we didn't know how to see. It has always been singing its slow, wide song, and we, brief, land-bound, curious, are finally learning how to hear it. Imagine, just for a moment, that the ocean is not just a place, not just a vast storehouse of water and memory, not just the domain of currents and creatures, but something more, something living, in a way not defined by cells or brains, something ancient and immense stretching beyond the boundaries of time as we understand it. And now imagine that you, your mind, your curiosity, your questions, are the ocean's way of listening to itself. It may sound fanciful, even strange, but this is an idea that scientists, poets and philosophers have brushed up against again and again. That consciousness, far from being an isolated human phenomenon, may be something emergent, something that arises in complexity, in connection. And what is more complex, more interconnected than the sea? The ocean breathes, it circulates, it regulates temperature, it responds to inputs, it cycles nutrients, it transforms energy, it stores memory, not in thoughts perhaps, but in chemistry, in motion, in the slow patterns of sediment and salinity. And in us it finds something new, it finds reflection. We are made of water. Our blood echoes the composition of the sea. Our rhythms follow the pull of tides and moons. When we speak of the ocean, we are speaking of something that exists not just around us, but within us. It shapes our climates, our crops, our histories, our migrations, and now, through technology and thought and deep dives into the abyss, it shapes our imagination too. Every sonar ping sent into the deep, every submersible lowered into a trench, every data point plotted from a current, every image beamed back from a remotely operated vehicle drifting beneath the ice. These are not intrusions, they are moments of recognition. The ocean, through us, is becoming aware of itself. This is not the same as saying the ocean thinks, at least not in the way we do, but it does have cycles, memory, reactivity. It sustains its own evolution. It changes in response to changes. It holds life and transforms it. And perhaps, in some slow, broad, planetary sense, our questions are its questions too. Think about what we've done, even in the brief time we've been here. We've asked what lies at the bottom of the sea, and found answers that shattered what we thought life needed to exist. We've searched for patterns in the chaos of waves, and discovered planetary engines of climate and motion. We've looked into the darkness and found light, not just metaphorically, but literally. Creatures glowing with bioluminescence, using chemistry to communicate in a language older than sound. Every discovery we make is a ripple that moves outward. It changes the next question, reshapes our understanding of the previous one. It brings us not closer to closure, but deeper into participation. This is not a ladder we're climbing, it's a spiral we're entering. The more we learn, the more we are drawn into the dance. And in that dance we begin to realise we are not above the ocean, not outside it, not observers peering in from some detached vantage point. We are part of it. Our nervous systems, our dreams, our very ability to wonder, these are not in opposition to the sea. They are its flowering, its bloom. The way a tree blooms with leaves, the ocean blooms with minds like ours. Even the act of listening to this story, here and now, is part of that unfolding. You're giving your attention to something vast. You're letting yourself feel the rhythm of tides, not just in the world, but in thought. That quiet sensation of being small but connected, of being humbled but also belonging. That is what it means to be the ocean's listener. That is what it means to be its storyteller. And isn't that what dreams are? The self reflecting on the self. A mind speaking in symbols, processing what it cannot fully name. In that sense, perhaps humanity is the ocean dreaming, wondering, asking, slowly becoming something that can gaze into itself and say, there is more here than I can know, but I am still part of it. Of course, we could explain this in purely biological terms. We evolved near water, we depended on the sea for food. Our cognitive tools are shaped by survival in marine-adjacent environments. But there's something beyond function here. Something like reverence. Something like belonging without control. The ocean has always asked us to surrender. Not to give up, but to let go of the illusion that we are separate from the world we seek to understand. So here we are now, at the end of a long drift. We've followed currents and chemosynthetic creatures. We've moved through crushing depths and geological time. We've floated above canyons, walked among microbial mats, traced the memory of water back through ice ages and into the future. And in all of this, the ocean has not become smaller. It has become more alive. It's no longer just a backdrop for adventure or science. It is a presence, a co-thinker, a slow, dreaming force that has in its own way given birth to the questions we now ask of it. You, listening now, are not separate from that. You are a ripple in that consciousness. You are one of the ways the ocean dreams. In our final session, we'll bring this dream to a close, not with an answer, but with a gentle farewell. Because the ocean does not end when we stop thinking about it. It keeps moving. The tide still rises, the deep still holds its peace, and wonder does not need to be resolved. It only needs to be kept company. You've been here a while now, floating gently through stories of depth and darkness, of silence and slow revelation. The ocean has carried us, not with crashing waves or sudden tides, but with something quieter, something deeper, like a current moving far beneath the surface, slow but sure, patient and persistent. And now, as we drift toward the end of this journey, there's no need to summarize. You already know what the ocean has said to you, not in facts or figures, but in feeling. This is not the kind of knowing that fills a test or completes a diagram. It's the kind that lives behind your thoughts, in the soft spaces of wonder and stillness. The kind of knowing that comes when you stop needing to explain and simply begin to listen. Because the truth is, the ocean will never be fully known, not by us, not in our lifetime, or even in 1,000 lifetimes. Not because we're incapable, but because the ocean is not a thing to be completed. It is not a territory waiting for final mapping, or a puzzle with a missing piece. It's a presence, a rhythm, a language that doesn't need translation to be heard. And still, we try. We send signals. We map coastlines. We lower machines into the dark. We ask questions about life and time and heat and memory. And with every question, we open ourselves not to answers but to wonder. And that is enough. There's something comforting in this, that the ocean does not need to be solved, that our relationship with it is not defined by mastery but by attention. The act of noticing is sacred. The willingness to wonder is a kind of reverence, and sometimes, when you're quiet enough, that reverence becomes a resting place. You may never see a hydrothermal vent. You may never dive to the bottom of the Mariana Trench or hold a bioluminescent jellyfish in your hand, but the truth of the ocean is still yours. It lives in the breath you take, humid and ancient. It echoes in your heartbeat, your blood salinity, your pulse tied in some deep way to tides you'll never touch. You don't need to go there to be part of it. You already are. And so are your questions. The ocean is filled with silence, but it is not mute. It responds in its own time, sometimes in light, sometimes in pressure, sometimes in the delicate spiral of a microscopic shell falling through darkness, and sometimes the response is you, your thoughts, your listening, your decision to care even when no easy story is offered in return. This is how mystery works. It does not withhold, it invites. So let go of the need for a final point. There is no neat ending here. Just as the ocean has no single edge, this story has no tight bow. Instead, let it dissolve, let it sink, let it settle around you like warm water in a quiet bay at dusk. Let it become part of your breath, your thoughts, your sleep. If you find yourself drifting now, that's not a problem. It's a kind of remembering, a gentle joining. Sleep, after all, is not unlike the ocean. It carries you somewhere unspoken, beneath thought, beneath time. It doesn't demand direction. It just holds you, patiently. You might dream of waves or whales or glowing fish with translucent skin. You might dream of dark trenches with slow-moving shadows, or of wide blue surfaces stretching beyond vision, wind, rippling across them like thoughts you forgot to think. And when you wake, the ocean will still be there, still vast, still unfinished, still calling in its quiet, wordless way. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, they're meant to be accompanied. Some questions don't need answers, they need time. Some wonders don't ask you to know them, they ask you to rest beside them. And the ocean, this deep, breathing memory of the planet, it doesn't mind that you don't know every trench, or every fish, or every current. It only asks that you notice, that you listen, that you remember what it means to feel small and to feel awe. So wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever brought you here, thank you. Thank you for drifting with us, for letting your thoughts rise and fall with the tide, for being part of this slow unfolding. Sleep well, little ocean still unknown. The world is still wide, the tide is still rising. And somewhere, in the deep, a question you didn't know you were asking is still echoing softly.